This talk is a part of series on Sri Aurobindo's book, Synthesis of Yoga. And today's talk is from the section on Jnana Yoga or Yoga of Integral Knowledge on this book. It's the chapter 16 in this section. And the title of the chapter is Oneness. It's a moment of gratitude for all of us to gather on the Siddhi day. And such sacred days are an opportunity for all of us because the universe aligns in such a way that they offer us greater opportunities to deepen our spiritual progress. And so with the sincere hope that today we can nurture and grow through the exploration of this chapter, which is called as Oneness, we start the today's session. So before we start exploring the section on oneness, chapter on oneness, let's take a little background on the previous chapter, which was called as Cosmic Consciousness. All the chapters in this book, so to say, are complete within themselves, but they are also in continuation to what has been explored in the past. So it's good to take a background on this chapter, which is called as Cosmic Consciousness, where the aspiration was laid down by Sri Aurobindo to experience the Satchit Ananda in all the dualities of experience in this universe. We are all constantly experiencing dualities of good and evil, harmony and conflicts, pleasure and pain. Amongst all these dualities, to experience Satchit Ananda. And the second aspiration in that chapter was about calling down the divine love, light and joy, not just at the mental level in form of a peace, but developing a capacity for it to descend down into the heart, into the vital and into the physical through expansion. And the basis for this experience, which is laid down, is from a space of conscious witnessing. Because Satchit Ananda is not something that can be possessed through the mind. It at best can be approached through the mind. So the basis of this experience is a state of conscious witnessing from behind or from above, wherein one first answers the question, who am I and to whom do I belong? If the answer is, I am this physical body and I belong to this earth, then it, so to say, takes us away from this conscious witnessing. But the moment the answer is that I am this divine soul and I belong to the Supreme Divine, then it takes us closer to this experience of conscious witnessing, which gradually deepens and opens a person to the experience of Satchidananda, the Supreme, beyond this universe in the transcendent, as that infinite one and equally in an infinite multiplicity. And from that space of witnessing, there is a possibility of seeing that whole Satchidananda in this universe in all the dualities, because it is this Chit or the Chitta Shakti, through its dualities and polarities, it is manifesting and fulfilling itself in this universe. And the second aspiration of developing the capacity for this Satchidananda to descend into the physical calls for an expansion of the consciousness. There can be an individualized consciousness where from behind we are consciously witnessing what's going on inside this body and around. Or there can be an expansion of this individualized consciousness where the walls of this individuality are broken and there is an expansion towards the cosmos or the universe. And in that expansion, the individualized consciousness can relate to the cosmic consciousness either as a lesser self or a greater self, or it expands and enjoys the presence of the cosmic consciousness, or it merges and expands and merges with the entire cosmos and experiences a certain liberation. And when this individualized consciousness expands, there is also a possibility to see the oneness between the individual physical and the physical of the whole. This body is in a way a cell of the cosmic body. This vital or prana is in a way a spark of the cosmic fire. This mind in a way is an antenna to this universal mind. And when this expansion happens, then there is a possibility for the love, light, and the power of the divine to descend into not just the mind, but also into the universal vital and the cosmic physical self. So this, in a way, completes the process of descent. So Sri Aurobindo's whole conversation, to take an overview, has been about developing or charting out a path for the sadhak to ascend from the individual consciousness towards the Supreme Divine, and then not just be lost in that supreme silence, but also chart out a clear path for the descent of the consciousness back again, and to have a tangible experience of the divine in the here and now. And that is why in this journey we have reached a point in the section on Jnana Yoga where it is about what after meditation. Usually we go into a state of silence in meditation, but when we come out of it, we meet the world in the same way as it was earlier. So these chapters are about how do we meet the world again coming out of a meditative state. Do we go back to again looking at this world in its fragmentary experience? Or there is a possibility of carrying that same oneness into our daily life, which is the aspiration of this chapter, which is called as oneness. Here Sri Aurobindo at the outset in this chapter points out that this fact that we are all one divine, भगवान सबके अंदर है, भगवान ईश्वर परे भी है और हम सबके अंदर भी है. This, you want to say something? Yes. Okay. भगवान सबके अंदर है, मैं भगवान के अंदर कब होऊंगा? What will Aurobindo say to this question? The answer will come. The answer will come. The answer will. Yeah, it will come. Yeah. So this is something which is admitted by every philosophy. This fact that God is inside all of us and we are all one is present in every possible philosophy. But he points out that this oneness is felt more in the transcendent experience than it is felt here in this cosmic experience, in the here and now. It is felt as more pure in the impersonal than in the personal here. It feels more satisfying in the peace and silence of the transcendence than in the dynamic manifested life here. And hence, that higher nature or that transcendent universe is seen as something superior to what is present here and now. And hence, in the sadhak, a natural inclination to want to live in more and more silence, want to live in more and more peace, rather than being present here. There is a certain enamoring towards that, or in the moments of difficulty, an escape towards that. So to this, Sri Aurobindo says that integral knowledge finds the same oneness in the unmanifest and the manifest, in the impersonal and the personal, in the nirguna and the saguna, in the infinite depths of the universal silence and the infinite largeness of the universal action. So it is the aspiration of this chapter is about being able to see equally the same oneness in the unmanifest universe and the manifest, in the impersonal and the personal, in the nirguni and the saguni. The experience of an infinite unity or oneness, just like in a flower, there is at the center a certain unity, and in the petals going out in varied directions, a certain variation or difference. So the same way the universe can experience that infinite oneness. We can experience that infinite oneness in the unity and in the largeness or in the variation, a certain difference, a richness and abundance of life. This Sri Aurobindo describes to live, to think, to feel, to will and act in that sense of unity is its effectuation in the individual being and the individual life. This realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference is the whole of yoga. So to realize the divine in oneness and to practice oneness in the difference is the whole of yoga. And that is what is the true aspiration of this chapter. And to make this vision real to us, we need to acknowledge that the divine or the Satchidananda in the manifest universe in a way is veiled. It is not visible to us. And in the transcendent, it is revealed. So the first step for us is an acceptance in seeing this manifest universe as a half-veiled manifestation of the divine. We are ready to accept it, that it is not some chaotic world, but it is, so to say, a half-veiled manifestation of the same divine. The step 2 is to reconcile the two aspects of human living. The first aspect which we are used to is viewing this world as made of material, and we are experiencing it through our mind as a material world. Everything is physical as a hard mass. And the second is a spiritual life. As a sadhak experiences that silence, there is an inner spiritual living in the depths of the spirit and in the silence and above. And these are the two different polarities that emerge in a human being. A life which is mind and material, and a life which is inner and spiritual. To reconcile these two lives is where the possibility of experiencing that equality in higher nature and lower nature exists. And to reconcile that, Sri Aurobindo offers a shift in perspective of how we look at the physical, how we look at the vital, how we look at the mind. The physical can be looked at from that inner spiritual sense as a mold of the spirit, a sense-created mold of the spirit. From our senses, this physical appears as a hard mass, but we know through science that actually it is not a hard mass. There is a lot more space in it than actual hard mass. So same way, when we look at it from the inner senses, one can acknowledge that this physical is actually a mold of the spirit. It is the same spirit manifesting in different densities. When it is in subtler densities, then it appears as the vital. When it is in further subtler densities, it appears as the mind. And in a greater density, it is physical. So it is a mold of the spirit. Then the vital can be viewed as a channel for the divine force. Normally, how do we experience vital? One of the experience of, or prime example of vital is breath. So how do we normally experience breath is as an important enlivening force. It is that force which brings the matter alive. Without it, nothing can move. So vital is that force which moves things, makes them alive. From the spiritual perspective, one can see the same breath as a channel for the divine force. One can feel that every breath is actually emanating from the same spirit, from the same Satchidananda. And this in itself is a very beautiful meditation, so to say. In our day-to-day life, we find ourselves caught up in ambitions, desires, and the vital feels a certain distance from the Supreme Divine. But through this little practice, maybe we can all engage in this practice in this moment to experience it. Maybe we can close our eyes and take a few deep breaths. You can imagine a flower in the center of our hearts. And from that flower, one can feel every breath go in and out. And observe the breath. And observe that how every breath is actually emanating from that one Supreme Divine. It can stay with that flower and feel the in-breath and the out-breath, and how every breath is emanating from that Supreme Divine. And as one starts to feel that every breath is a channel for that divine force, that divine force starts to take charge of the prana and the vital. And it can expand that individual breath towards a universal breath. A cosmic breath. And seeing both emanating from that one Supreme Divine. And as it takes a greater and greater, a more and more intimate charge over the vital gradually transforms into an all blissful conscious force of the Satchidananda. So how beautiful is this simple shift in perspective that Sri Aurobindo offers, rather than seeing the prana or the breath as a mere enlivening force on earth for the matter. A shift in perspective in seeing every breath emanating from that same Supreme Divine. And it becomes a very quick way to align oneself back again to the Supreme Divine and Satchidananda, and in a way to align oneself to the divine will in every moment of our life, and to not just align oneself to the divine will, through that universal breath experience, align oneself to the divine will in this whole universe and within every individual. So this is the shift in perspective in the physical, rather than viewing physical as hard mass and matter, seeing it as a mold of the spirit, a vehicle of the spirit, and seeing the life and vital as a channel for the divine force. The next is the heart and the emotions. So the heart and emotions and the sensory seeking after the delight, or sensory seeking after craving for pleasure, can also be seen as a play of the divine love and the universal delight. So we see the senses, they are constantly craving for pleasure and in a way are averse to pain. But in a shift of perspective, it can be seen that the senses are actually seeking that same divine ananda or the universal delight. The heart, which is constantly experiencing different emotions, anger, hatred, jealousy, human affection, fear, behind all these emotions, actually it is the divine unconditional love which is the basis of these emotions. It's a beautiful moment to look at how the process of ascent and descent actually mirror each other. In the first few chapters in Gyan Yoga, Sri Aurobindo starts with the very basis of what a sadhak needs to do to purify himself in order to be able to ascend towards the Supreme Divine. And in this chapter, Sri Aurobindo offers the process of descent and a shift of perspective to how to view life. In the chapter in purification, Sri Aurobindo shares a way of looking at the vital, that in order to purify vital, one needs to enjoy what is there in front of us in the present moment. It is quite natural for our prana seeks enjoyment. But the purification of the prana lies in enjoying what is in front of it rather than seeking enjoyment in past or future. When I get this, then I will enjoy. It is that in the past which I enjoyed. So moving from that space to purifying and enjoying what is there in the present moment. And that prepares the prana for ascent. It purifies the prana for ascent. And then it goes beyond in the experience of samadhi, and as it descends down, now Sri Aurobindo shares a shift in perspective to view prana as a channel of the divine force and a channel for the divine fulfillment. So initially it is enjoying what is there in the present moment, and upon descent it is a means for the divine fulfillment. Same with the heart. The process of purification of heart was about loving with calmness and depth. Normally in the restlessness, there is love with attachments. There is a superficial love. There is a conditional love. But as the love deepens, and as it deepens through calmness and peace, the love starts to grow and touch the deeper unconditional divine love. And then it has a possibility of ascending towards the divine. And then now in the process of descent, it is about seeing all the outgoing emotions from the heart, whether it is joy or sorrow or anger or jealousy, all these emotions, their basis as the divine love. And then that divine love has the capacity to transform all these emotions. Same with the senses. The process of purification that Sri Aurobindo shares is to develop the capacity to keep the senses open and receptive to all the rasas, pain, pleasure, beauty, disharmony, all these experiences for the senses to stay open to, and relay the information to the mind and the intellect unaltered. And now, in the process of descent, it is about saturating the senses with the divine ananda. the delight of the divine, the universal delight. And as the senses get saturated with this divine delight, they are equally open to every experience, no matter how pleasurable or painful that experience is. A prime example of that is Sri Aurobindo's writing on his jail experience, which is in a way the heights of human suffering, being in a jail with very little light and no human interaction, and just being handed a bowl, being used for everything, is in a way a height of human suffering. Yet his senses being saturated with this universal delight, it's such a joy to read his description of how he describes that same jail experience, because his senses are saturated with that universal delight. So in a way we see that how the process of purification, the very elementary level which we need to start with every day in the morning or when we sit down to meditate or do something, the process of purification and then ascent and the descent actually mirror each other. And then the same thing with the intellect, the buddhi. The buddhi with its two tendencies, one is to seek knowledge and second is to will things into action. Buddhi feels that, intellect feels that it can acquire a lot of knowledge, plan and do things, and through which it can be the master. It also at times feels that it can find out the path to the divine and possess the divine. But actually the truth is that intellect at best is a scout. Sri Aurobindo describes this as one of the previous chapter, that intellect feels like it is the pioneer of the being. It is the one which is running the show, but actually it is at best a scout. The true pioneer is the deep, dynamic, divine will seated within us, or our own will. It is something we all commonly understand, that whatever we want to do, the intellect has the capacity to justify it. A person who has to drink alcohol can justify it, that doctors say that 60 ml of alcohol is good for your heart. And even a saint can justify his own actions, quoting Shastras. So it is actually not the intellect which is the master, but it is the will. Whatever we will to do, the intellect can become a means to justify that action. And hence, intellect by itself can be used to seek security or validation of our existence, or it can be a means to align to that divine will, that deep dynamic divine will, tapas shakti or knowledge will. In the lower nature, the knowledge and will come across as two separate things, but in the higher nature, the knowledge and will become one. They become the tapas shakti. So in the process of descent, in the inner spiritual living, the tapas shakti or the knowledge will needs, its light needs to be surcharged over the intellect. So that is the last shift in perspective that Sri Aurobindo shares, moving from the mind and material living where intellect comes across as the leader, to a shift in perspective acknowledging the limitation of intellect. Intellect feels that it has understood XYZ facts, it has created associations. Taking an example from medical field, that COVID हुआ है तो कोरोना वायरस की वजह से हो रहा है. So this kind of a linear association, viral infection, virus is the cause behind the fever, is how the intellect perceives things. Whereas the fact is that in this universe, everything is related to everything. So these are just reductionistic conclusions that the intellect draws for itself. So to acknowledge this limitation of the intellect and to surcharge the knowledge will or the tapas shakti and its light is the other shift in perspective that is required in order to create that alignment between our spiritual life and the day-to-day life. And when these shifts come together, we will explore this in a meditative experience now, but this shift comes, then another thing that comes along with this is the unition of three forms of yoga, which is Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. Because Jnana Yoga is seeking of the truth of the divine, in a way the seeking of the Sat, the divine as existence. Karma Yoga is a seeking of aligning oneself to the divine will, which is in a way the Chitta Shakti. And Bhakti Yoga is in a way seeking of an intimacy with the divine, experience of being touched by the divine delight and love, which is Ananda. So this unition of Sat, Chit, Ananda and a seeking of yoga of integral knowledge, Sat, Chit, Ananda, brings together a unition also of the Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and the Karma Yoga. Now before we move forward, let's bring all these realizations together and let's again try to experience what we have just discussed. So we can close our eyes and again take a few deep breaths. We'll go through in a way what Sri Aurobindo has described all through this section in Jnana Yoga, in a way of a meditative experience, culminating into this chapter on oneness, what he shares about the descent and the shift of perspective. So we can again take our attention to our hearts and visualize a flower and breathe into that flower and breathe out through the flower. And observe all the feelings, all the emotions and thoughts from that in-breath and out-breath within the heart. Neither interfering with these feelings nor accepting them as one's own. These are feelings, these are thoughts, these are emotions. Telling oneself that this physical body, this is not myself or thyself. This is one working of the Prakriti. Stand back from it. These dual emotions of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, joy, sorrow, highs, lows, expansion, contraction. These are one working of the Prakriti in the heart and the senses. Stand back from it. I am not even this thought or the thinker or the rights or the wrongs. These are one working of the Prakriti in the mind. I am not even these possessions, achievements, physical possessions, material possessions, spiritual possessions, intellectual possessions. These are one workings of the Prakriti. Stand back from it and witness that one light of the divine present within all in this universe. And then ascend upwards as the divine soul beyond this universe, to meet the Absolute, the Supreme Source of love, light, joy, kindness, the Supreme Divine, the formless, becoming into a conscious witness of this entire universe. Eventually merging into the void, the undescribable. And from there, descending and expanding laterally into the space of Sarva Brahman, where all that has ever existed or will ever exist, all that the mind can conceive or perceive, exists as a puppet of light. that same infinite, one absolute divine present within all. And one sees and offers one's entire personal will to this immense experience of Sarva Brahman. In this moment, seeing the polarity of life, on one end, the silence of the transcendent, and on the other end, the surface where there is a compulsive tendency to look outward. And hold steadfast in this moment to the supreme Sarva Brahman experience, where there is infinite oneness, yet also infinite multiplicity. And as we descend, there is the joy of infinite creation. And one descends with this infinite oneness and multiplicity and this joy of creation down into this universe, seeing that infinite oneness and multiplicity, that divine soul and an infinite inner universe within every particle, every living or inanimate creature in this universe. And see the same divine Shakti at work in all dualities of life. And as one descends down into the individualized consciousness, seeing this body as a mold of the spirit, a fluid mold of the spirit, seeing the breath as a channel for the divine force, experiencing the universal breath and seeing the same divine force in every individual, realizing that the breath is emanating from that same divine force. Seeing and witnessing the heart's emotions and the senses as a play of the divine love and the universal delight, saturating the senses with the universal delight, and surcharging the intellect with the light of the divine force. So we all can experience this whole thing to varying degrees. The witnessing can be superficial to very deep. Going towards the transcendent, supreme divine can take various spectrums of samadhi experience, and descending down can also take varying degrees of being anchored into the very basis, which is the Satchidananda, and to varying degrees we can saturate ourselves with the divine delight. But no chapter on oneness can be complete without talking about the other polarity, which is conflict, which is, so to say, a part of our day-to-day life. Conflict, struggle, competition is a part of our day-to-day life. We can talk about oneness, we can talk about the one divine in all of us, but then what happens in moments of conflict where we disagree with each other? So to answer this question, again let's look at it from below and then again back from above. From below, if in the moments of conflict we are identified with the physical body and the mind that I am this, then it's a natural reaction to want to win or succeed or withdraw from a conflict. But if we are close to the truth of the being, that I am this divine soul and I belong to the supreme divine, and so is the other person involved in the conflict, then there is a possibility of responding to the situation and seeking triumph rather than success or failure. Triumph, so to say, is equality and equanimity in the face of both success and failure. And yet, in that moment, to practice one's swadharma. It's that what was taught to Arjuna, who found himself in that huge conflict. Sri Krishna shares him the secret of oneness and then asks him to practice his swadharma and seek triumph. It does not matter what is the outcome, whether you win or lose. Do your swadharma. So from below, this is how one can deal with conflicts and yet maintain one's perspective of oneness. From above in this chapter, Sri Aurobindo shares that as we align and we understand that every breath is emanating from that same divine, one realizes and aligns oneself with the divine will within oneself and the other person with whom there is a conflict and in the whole universe. And in that moment, when one is looking from above, the perspective shifts towards universal fulfillment. Whatever will fulfill the universe, be it success or failure, what remains important is to align and realize the divine will within oneself and be a part of the universal fulfillment. So winning and losing in conflicts loses perspective over the universal fulfillment, which makes it truly an experience of oneness in one of the most opposite scenarios to what one may say is oneness. Eventually, Sri Aurobindo at the end of this chapter shares, and he brings this almost at the end of every chapter in Gyan Yoga, is that the ultimate culmination of this experience of oneness can only happen in the supramental. And it is about, when we go through these processes, we align ourselves more and more to the supramental, we nurture that consciousness, so to say, within ourselves. But eventually, this whole experience finds its ultimate fulfillment in the supramental, and he describes it as, from the supramental, the 7 rivers. He quotes Vedas, the 7 rivers. 7 rivers flow from the superior light of love, light, and joy, and that eventually it reveals the truth behind the scattered and ill-combined suggestions of our mentality, and makes each fall into its place in the unity of the truth behind. Thus, it can transform the half-light of our minds into a certain totality of light. So the supramental reveals the truth behind all the scattered suggestions of our mind. One viewpoint looking from one direction, the other viewpoint, all the scattered suggestions. It reveals that there is a half-light behind all of them, and it brings them all together and unites them. And it does the same to our will. It reveals the will behind all the devious and imperfectly regulated strivings of our mental will, emotional wishes, vital efforts, and makes each to fall into its place in the unity of the luminous will behind. Thus, it transforms the half-obscure struggle of our life and mind into a certain totality of ordered force. So it reveals behind all the devious wills, imperfect wills in the mind, in the emotional wishes, and also in the vital cravings and strivings, and it brings all of them together. It transforms all of them and brings them together close in one luminous will. So that is the power of the supramental, and it can be practically brought into our life to some degree by the psychic being from the depths of this heart. That is why every meditation, so to say, it's beautiful to start it from that heart space and psychic space, which puts us to some degree in touch with that supramental light. Thank you. Dr. Bijlani, would you like to add something?
I know it's already quite late, and normally I wouldn't have come in to make any comments which are not absolutely necessary, in fact. But today is a special day, so I thought you may not mind if the satsang lasts a little longer. The topic was oneness, and why is oneness important to understand? Oneness is important to understand because it is the very foundation of love, and love is in turn the foundation of our happiness, which is something which all of us want. We all want to be happy, but then it's a timeless universal wisdom that genuine happiness comes from love, giving love as well as receiving love, both of which are needs, and both go together because we can give love only if there is somebody to receive. And both experience that joy of giving love and receiving love. But then who are the people whom we love? We love those with whom we feel one. A mother loves her child because it actually comes from her body. And therefore, she cannot see the child as another being. She looks upon the child as an extension of herself. The child is not another individual for her. It is herself, and therefore, she can give the best and quality of love. The child is not well, the mother does not mind staying awake the whole night because she does not see the child's needs and her needs as the needs of two separate individuals. She just looks at which need is more important. Taking care of the child is more important than her need for sleep. Even if she is very sleepy, somehow the sleep disappears and she is able to stay awake. So that's because she feels one with the child. And we normally shower this type of love based on this sense of oneness on those with whom we feel one to some extent in one way or the other. We belong to the same family, we belong to the same clan, we belong to the same neighborhood, we work at the same place, we belong to the same country, we speak the same language, and so on and so forth. So, some sort of a foundation we have for having this sense of oneness, and then depending upon how intimate we feel, how actually one we feel, on the basis of one of these criteria, we shower different degrees of love. But then, is there something fundamentally one about us which will make this love universal rather than stay confined to a few individuals based on some of these criteria? One modern tendency, which is rather glib and sounds very good, is that we are all one because we are all human beings and therefore we should love all humanity. Very easy to say, but what is difficult is to love a few real human beings. Now, is there something at the spiritual level where this sense of oneness acquires a real reality for us? It becomes a profound truth. And the simpler way to put it is that we are all one because we are children of the same God. But then still we can see that God is one, we are something else, we are God's children. And God has many children, we happen to be one of them. Each individual happens to be one of them, which means that as children we are all individuals as separate. So, which means that still it does not give that sense of oneness. But if you look at it from the Vedantic point of view, you find that actually this sense of oneness is driven to its most logical conclusions because the Creator did not really create the creation, the Creator became the creation. When the unmanifest divine, to start with, decided to manifest, it had no other choice because no material was available for creating the material universe. It had no other choice to itself become that material from which the universe could be, material universe could be created, and then that material started expressing the hidden divinity in it more and more, bit by bit, and this greater expression gave rise to living creatures, then to more highly evolved living creatures, the plants, the animals, and the latest product of this process is the human being. But all the same, it has been a progressive unfolding or revelation of the hidden divinity in all creation. And if you look at it this way, then you find that in fact, all creation is nothing but another form of the Creator. Because the Creator itself became the creation. It was one, it became many, but then because that one has become many, those many are in fact one. So, if we are different forms, the forms are separate, but actually it is the one which has divided. It's something like the rays of the sun. The sun is one, the rays are many, but then each of the rays cannot be considered anything different from the sun itself. Or say the waves in an ocean, the ocean is one, the waves may be individual, but none of the waves can claim to be really any different from the ocean. They have a certain intrinsic oneness because they are in fact that one. So now if the oneness is so fundamental, why do we feel that we are separate? That is an illusion that has been created again by the Creator, and this illusion of multiplicity is so strong, so convincing, that in spite of knowing that we are all one, we live life as if we are separate individuals. And the notion of oneness which we have is dismissed as some sort of a theoretical construct which is okay, nice to feel, but then at the same time, our life doesn't revolve around it. So that is why a detailed sort of discussion becomes necessary, effort becomes necessary. We have to struggle to actually realize and then effectuate this sense of oneness in our life, to organize our life around this oneness. That takes a long struggle and effort. So that is where the difficulty comes in, and that's why we need all this. So it's so much so that in fact sometimes we start feeling that the real truth, reality is separation, and oneness is only a theoretical construct. That happens because what we see is what we feel is true, but then that is actually an illusion, and unless we start with that faith of oneness, we cannot realize that oneness. So especially for those of us who are knowledge oriented, and by and large those who come to a gathering like this are knowledge oriented, and therefore their best beginning is through the yoga of knowledge, which is what we are doing these days. So so to start with this knowledge is good, but then the next step would be to actually realize it, and after that to organize our life around it. One of the difficulties that comes in to accept this oneness is that if we are all one, if we are all divine, and the divine is perfect, why are we so imperfect? Why do you find so much evil around us? Why do you find so much of what is completely apparently undivine actually being expressed in the world? In fact, that all these imperfections are in a way not imperfections, but the result of self-limitation. The divine has limited itself, it has expressed itself only to a very limited extent, and by this limitation, self-limitation, or holding back, as Sri Aurobindo calls it, holding back of a lot that it could do, that these imperfections result. So we have to look upon these imperfections also in that charitable light as expressions of the same divine, but a result of a willful, deliberate holding back or self-limitation on the part of the divine. And why the divine did it, the divine only can answer, but that is what this whole game or Leela is about, and that's why we call it a game. So the divine has devised it in this way, and that is why this game continues with these imperfections, moving towards perfection, with the aspiration for perfection planted in us, and that is what actually makes this Leela go on and prolongs it. Now, Sri Aurobindo has talked about the lower nature and the higher nature in this chapter, and it was mentioned that when we try to ascend to that higher nature, as happens during the state of meditation, then in fact we can experience this oneness, get glimpses of this oneness, and feel that we are actually a small drop in a vast ocean, and the essence of each of the drops is exactly the same, and the essence is full of that love and light of the divine. And when we do that, we feel that we are just one drop floating in a vast ocean. The ocean itself is all love and light and delight. Now when we get that type of an experience, even if it's in a glimpse, it sends us into an ecstatic mood. But then when we come out of the meditation, as was said a few minutes back, that we seem to come back to square one, because this illusion of multiplicity is extremely convincing, and that is what we have got conditioned to accepting as real. So it's a conditioned mind which makes us accept that as real. But then if we say that it is not only during meditation that this can happen, it can happen when we are completely calm and at peace. Even in the awake state, awake means when we are not apparently into a formal meditation. Which means that if we have to organize our life around this oneness, and why is that important? Because that is the basis of love, and love is the basis of happiness. So if we want universal happiness, we have to have universal love, and for universal love, we have to have this sense of universal oneness. That is the very foundation of it. So that is why it is important. It is not something which is only of academic interest or of interest only to those who want to go into an ecstasy by having an experience which is out of the ordinary. It is none of those things. It has immense practical importance, and any step towards that, and again, it's not a all or none process, it's a graded process. Any step towards that sense of universal oneness has great practical significance, and that is why it becomes important. So the beginning can be through those glimpses in the meditative state. Those glimpses can become a little more constant, less interrupted, if we can bring the same degree of calmness also into our ordinary waking life, ordinary existence, when we are engaging with the world. And one of the things which can help is that we keep reminding ourselves of this oneness wherever we are, whenever we have anything in front of us. Anything means not just human beings, maybe plants, animals, anything that we see, try to remind ourselves, yes, this is also the same as me. We are one. So this sort of a mental exercise, just that feeling itself can help a lot. That itself can become a waking and walking and working meditation. And that is an opportunity which all of us have all the time, of just looking around and looking around the individuals around us or anything else that we see around us, not as individual units, not as distinct sort of fragments, but as fundamentally one, which have put on this appearance of separation. Separation is only a partial reality. The actual thing is one. Now, it is difficult, but any step in that direction helps. And difficulty is because ordinarily we live at the level of the mind, and the mind, when it filters this type of knowledge, deeper knowledge that we have at some level in which we have some faith, it tends to again take us back to the limited and conditioned state in which we are. In fact, it can be accentuated also by too much of intellectualizing. Because again, those of us who come here are more knowledge-oriented, which means that there may be a certain basis in curiosity, wanting to know things, wanting to get deeper into spiritual truths. So this curiosity is helpful in intensifying the aspiration. But then to hope that the final answers will also come through this intellect which led to this curiosity is a misguided hope. Because they will not finally come from the intellect, because the intellect is not capable of rising to that level which will make us see that oneness rather than the separation. The intellect has its own limitations. And this is one of the things that Sri Aurobindo has brought out beautifully here in these few lines. For our mentality, a restricted instrument moving in a limited field and seizing things by fragments and parcels is necessarily shifting, restless, and mutable. So that is the very nature of the intellect. For our mentality, a restricted instrument moving in a limited field. It's an instrument which is restricted in itself because the divine has chosen to limit itself while expressing itself through the body or the mind or the intellect. So it is a restricted instrument moving in a limited field, which means, again, it is not looking at the entire infinite vast expanse. The maximum that it can think of is in terms of the physical universe. So it is moving in a limited field and seizing things by fragments and parcels. And wherever it looks around in the material universe, it finds separation, it finds fragments, it finds parcels, is necessarily shifting, and therefore it has this characteristic of shifting, restless, and mutable. It doesn't have a sense of constancy. It can find steadiness only by limiting its field of action and fixity, only by cessation and repose, which means that is a need for voluntarily putting a halt, making it stop. Curiosity to know was enough, was good, but then one doesn't have to go on arguing and questioning more and more, doubting more and more, and hoping that by this type of intellectual gymnastics, somehow final answers to this curiosity will be attained. Those final answers will not come from the intellect. In fact, they will come, in that intellectualizing can become a hindrance, they will come only by the cessation and repose. When you put a halt to it, when you cease this mental activity, make it repose, take some sort of a rest, give it some rest. It is in that silence, when the intellect is at rest, that the answers will come. And that's why you might find that the answers come if you try to think nothing. Just take a walk, look at the plants and animals around, and see the divine in them. In that, you can get the answers from the deeper level. So that cessation of mental activity and repose are in fact important. On the other hand, asking too many questions and raising doubts is not going to take us to any final answers. There was a saint in the 16th century. His name was Sadashiva Brahmendra. He was an intellectual and would argue with his guru a lot. So one day, when he was going on arguing, his guru said, "When will you stop talking?" And he said, "Just now." And he meant it literally. After that, for decades, he did not speak. He went into a total silence. And then, others started feeling that at least he should talk something. Otherwise, how will he be able to communicate his teachings and so on? So his friends convinced him that, again, trying to sort of find a way out of this promise that he had made, that I'll stop talking just now. So told him, you had said that you'll not talk. You didn't say that you will not sing, so you can at least sing. So then, he went on singing, and some of his compositions are among the best-known compositions in Kannada. I think he was from the south. Probably his parents were from Andhra, and he lived in Karnataka, so in that region, Andhra-Karnataka region. His name was Sadashiva Brahmendra. So, that is what Sri Aurobindo is saying here, that cessation and repose of the intellect is what will actually give you the answers and give you that experience to be able to make this awareness of oneness more and more constant, less interrupted. And that is what is important for the organizing our life around this, because that is where the focus of Sri Aurobindo always is. It's not just having that knowledge, having that realization, and using that as the foundation of escape from this world. This world is not real. Real thing is something beyond it, and having an escape, that is not what Sri Aurobindo is about. Keep coming back again and again, and that's why again towards the end, as Mangul said, that Sri Aurobindo brings out also that knowledge itself will lead to enlightened work and also to a sense of devotion. So in fact, the triune is one. So even if we start with knowledge, because that is what suits some temperaments, if we continue on the path of knowledge long enough and sincerely enough, you'll say that what is the use of all this knowledge if I don't put it into action, if I don't bring it into my life? And that's how enlightened action will follow. And then realizing the glory of the Lord, devotion cannot be far behind. So that knowledge makes us realize the glory of the Lord, and that's what brings in devotion. So the triune, in fact, is one. And based on all this, I'll stop with a very simple definition of yoga that Sri Aurobindo has given in this chapter. This realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference is the whole of the yoga. I don't think you can find a more comprehensive or simpler definition of yoga than this. The realization of oneness, that is the oneness becoming real to us. Not just as a theoretical concept, but as something which we have internalized and it has become real to us. The realization of oneness and this practice of oneness, that is putting this oneness into practice, bringing it into our daily life. That is developing that sense of universal love. Universal love does not mean just that theoretically I love everybody. Universal love means that if there's somebody in front of me who needs something which I can give, then I give that out of love, and without going into any other criteria in what way this individual is related to me, completely disregarding any of those superficial criteria which normally motivate love and intimacy, completely irrespective of those. Someone happens to be in front of me who needs something which I can give, I should be happy to share it. That is universal love. So that would be the practice of that oneness. So the realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference, which means that in spite of the differences, I can see those differences. We are not only we are not only separate individuals, we are also dissimilar in our appearances, in our temperaments, in so many ways. So in spite of those differences, to practice oneness. So it's not that you stop seeing the differences, but you do not live by those differences. You do not live because of those differences. Those differences do not affect how you will act in the world. So this realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference is the whole of the yoga. So that is what yoga is about. Very simple, isn't it? But at the same time, more than a lifetime's job.